Welcome to Dyspraxic Rosie Writes, a channel where we talk about dyspraxia, chronic illness, and the writing life. As I film this video, we're coming off the tail end of Dyspraxia Awareness Week, and by the time this is released, Dyspraxia Awareness Week will be over. So I want to cover some points that bring that into perspective, particularly something I've been thinking about around that of how to advocate more with dyspraxia, because that was a question that came up at one of the 2 events I did this week. And that's really a frustration I often feel by the end of these awareness weeks. I often feel they go quite well and there's a lot of unity and enthusiasm, but I really feel like there's a real sense of a gap in both dyspraxia advocates having enough support, but also in terms of us having more of a platform in neurodivergence and neurodiversity conversations in general. So we'll go over that in just a moment. Let's take, for example, the annual event of Neurodiversity Celebration Week. The thing I often notice is much of the discourse, despite the fact that it was originally founded by someone who is actually dyspraxic herself, along with being autistic, is that due to it being quite corporatized, it goes towards more so the forms of neurodiversity that get most of the support and the attention. So it amplifies mostly the voices of people who are dyslexic or autistic or have ADHD. Although many within the neurodiversity advocacy space have complained about this more so from the perspective of it being corporatized in recent years. I focus less on that because I get the good intent of it and I understand that much of the money in this space is through doing corporate events and not so much the grassroots stuff. I love the grassroots stuff, don't get me wrong, but that's very much the reality. And so I don't tend to be one of the people within this space that judges events like these for being a bit more corporatized. But rather, the bone I have to pick with it is the fact that it is a very much focusing on the bits that are getting more attention, like autism and ADHD. And also, too, it's more voices that feel very safe. There's not enough of people from certain minority communities because of that corporatized identity. That is unfortunately the downside. I can count on less than one hand the amount of dyspraxic voices that get an opportunity to talk. There's very talented individuals such as, to me, from the Black dyspraxic, who get to talk, but I don't feel like enough that many of these events are considering all these amazing dyspraxic voices that are getting misunderstood and underrepresented. One thing I feel we cannot claim is that there isn't enough dyspraxia advocates to work with. If you go to my previous video, which I'll link to in the description, there is a ton of different individuals profiled who did some amazing books and work on dyspraxia that are dyspraxic themselves. And if your problem is more that you don't know what sort of voices are out there, I encourage you to use that as a starting point. But what if you're looking at this as someone who is dyspraxic themselves? I admit I can really identify with that. When I wrote my first book, I had so many anxieties that no one was ever going to read it because there wasn't really a lot out there at the time in terms of books by dyspraxic authors that talked about dyspraxia that weren't in the form of something that's often easier to sell for publishers. I mean, as cynical as that is to say, it is somewhat of a reflection of the truth. I felt very discouraged early on in the querying process. But as I said, it's starting to change. I've been reading a lot of advanced copies lately from my publisher of a lot of books about dyspraxia by dyspraxic authors that either launched recently or are books that are going to launch in the next little while, that are that kind of quiet perspective of what it means to live with dyspraxia, and not trying to romanticize it in any way or play it up for humor, but to be authentic and real about your own voice and your own experiences. My recommendation for all the dyspraxics out there that are wanting to further increase the cause of dyspraxia within the broader world is somewhat cynically enough, but also based on the truth, something I've said twice in this video because it is very much a reflection of the truth, is that you really have to focus on finding your relevance within broader neurodiversity spaces, whether it be radio shows or podcasts, or even just social media posts responding to something that affects the broader neurodivergent community. And really, more so, the way to keep your point of view really relevant is to focus on that exactly. I mean, the cool thing about the broader neurodiversity movement is a lot of points of view overlap, no matter what formal diagnosis you have / more than one diagnosis. So even if a matter is something that is mostly affecting the ADHD community, for example, you might also have ADHD, or you might have a crossover symptom that is the same that many of your peers with ADHD might happen to have. Or it might be a bit broader than that. It might be socially. You might have the thing in common with the story itself, or even the broader cause of finding accessible events, accessible work opportunities, accessible education experiences that are very much based on the same sets of challenges and the same sets of needs in order to feel comfortable in your surroundings. So I think as dyspraxia advocates, the one thing we can do is focus on creating conversations that resonate with our other neurodivergent peers and focus on figuring out where our points of view are relevant, but also reminding them that we're here, seeing if they want to try to fill that void in forms of neurodivergences that they're not already talking about. And that has been a very, very big part of how I've tried to grow my platform, to think beyond just dyspraxia, to think even broader into communities that are representing the broader cause of neurodivergence, and where my point of view fits into that, how it's relevant to people. Because there's always people who may not know that dyspraxia may affect their peers, their colleagues, their friends, their families, or may simply think that even though the only neurodivergence they know that they have is something like autism, for example, that the symptoms of dyspraxia may resonate with them enough to consider a self-formal diagnosis as an option. That was a quick one just for now, just to get you start thinking about putting your perspectives as a dyspraxic person into the broader world. And I urge you in the comment section to see how these attempts have resonated with your own attempts at building a platform as an advocate, as an author, as maybe an artist, more broadly speaking. Happy reading, happy writing, my friends.